Welcome to another Uptime FM episode. I'm your host, Sean C. Davis, and today I'm super excited for this episode, really for two reasons. First, we've hit a pretty major milestone. This is the 20th live talk show that I've been able to host with CFE, going all the way back to last year's 10 episodes for Code Sandwich Hour. And with this 20th episode, we've been doing this for over a year. I went back and looked, and our first episode of Code Sandwich Hour featured Ray Camden, and that happened in early April of 2022. So really excited to hit this milestone and really excited for what is to come over the next year and the next 20 episodes. And that brings me to the other reason I'm super excited for this particular episode, and that is the topic that we're going to cover today. Today, we're going to talk about composable architecture, federated content, API mesh, however you know the concept. It's a pattern that has been growing in popularity over the last few years, even though it's kind of been around for a long time. And it's something that I tend to think about every day as Stackbit is fairly deep into this space. And today, I'm joined by Bryan Robinson, who is the head of DevRel at Hygraph. And now I don't know exactly what Hygraph is up to these days, but I'm very excited to spend this time learning. So let's get into it. And thanks for being here, Bryan.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and congrats on 20. And I like to think that Raymond Camden is like the ultimate in like early guest for these types of shows. He was, I think, guest number 2 or 3 on That's My Jamstack years and years ago, the podcast I used to run. So I think it's a rite of passage. You gotta get Raymond as early as possible.
Gotta do it. Yeah, I remember being so thankful to him, and saw him again a couple months ago, and I was like, you have no idea, help me get this thing started. And it was amazing. And he's like, no, it's just what I do. It's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So for those of you who didn't see the short teaser earlier in the week, Bryan wouldn't tell us what his favorite sandwich was before the show, but he gave us 3 choices. We had the Cuban, the Philly cheesesteak, and a grilled cheese, specifically on a homemade sourdough bread. And so, Bryan, the answer is?
I'm nothing if not enigmatic. That's the first thing everyone should know about me. But the answer is, well, first and foremost, I'm American. Therefore, I can make anything a sandwich. It's one of the things that we are very good at. We can put anything on bread and call it a sandwich, and we'll eat it, no problem. However, I come from Memphis, Tennessee, which is a barbecue town. So you might think barbecue sandwich. I got lots of opinions on barbecue. I absolutely adore barbecue. I don't enjoy a barbecue sandwich. My father is from South Jersey, just about an hour and a half outside of Philadelphia. So for me, it's not actually the Philly cheesesteak that is the best sandwich. It is the cheesesteak. If you have to say Philly cheesesteak, I know I said that in my video, and I know like I tweeted out earlier today, I said Philly because that's what everyone kind of knows it as. But the cheesesteak is the ultimate sandwich. It has amazing bread. It's this like kind of soft hoagie. It's got an amazing cheese or cheese product on it. Because if you're eating a traditional cheesesteak from Philly, you know that it comes with Cheese Whiz, not an actual cheese, but that neon yellow, like cheese product. And then some onions and then really finely shaved, ribeye or, some premium cut of meat. And it's delicious. And I've had the opportunity, because my dad was born and raised in that area, because we used to go there every summer. I've eaten at numerous different cheesesteak places in the Philly area. And I've also had in the Memphis area, there was a guy that moved to Memphis from the Philly area and had, I would controversially say, the best cheesesteaks I've ever had. And unfortunately, he closed down years ago at this point. But I worked about 2 miles from his shop, and I probably shaved multiple years off my life due to the proximity to that place. And it was amazing every time. He imported the rolls, the hoagie rolls from Philly. He had Tasty Cakes on premise. And if you are from the Northeast, or at least the Philly area, Tasty Cakes are the best packaged pastries you can possibly have. So yeah, I'm a huge cheesesteak fan. That being said, like the Cuban, almost up there. Grilled cheese on a really well done sourdough that I possibly make myself. Also amazing. So I just like sandwiches, but the cheesesteak is the number one.
Okay. So Now, did the Memphis guy also use the cheese whiz?
So I mean, you always have the giant bucket behind the counter, and like watching an efficient cheesesteak restaurant work is amazing. They've got the big old flat tops, and they've got like the two giant metal spatulas, and they're constantly chopping meat, constantly chopping onions, and they constantly have the giant vat of cheese whiz. In fact, there are ways to order at the various restaurants too. There's a restaurant in Philly called Pat's King of Steaks. And they have to move efficiently. Like that's the whole thing on a cheesesteak restaurant is efficiency, like getting the next sandwich out always. And if you order and take too long to order, they will send you to the back of the line. Or if you order improperly, they send you to the back of the line because, city of brotherly love, right? Yeah. But yeah, so like you order it cheese with or without, and that's not the whiz, that is the onions, with or without for the onions, and then you get cheese whiz. Like that's what you get. Now the place in Memphis also had provolone and like a Swiss American blend and some other stuff, but like whiz.
Amazing. Okay. This is I took a massive break from cheesesteaks because I had one when I was maybe in high school or so, and it had also caught a virus around the same time, and so it was like the memory of getting sick after eating that sandwich. It was decades till I came back to it. And then recently, it wasn't necessarily out of choice either. I was at a Super Bowl party a couple months ago, and the Philadelphia Eagles were playing in the game, and someone to honor the Eagles they made them, but they made everything from scratch. So found local steaks, cut them real thin, and also made the rolls from scratch. And I do believe we used Kraft American singles and not the whiz, but it still tasted fake, which was good. Yeah. So anyways, I'm back on board.
I make cheesesteaks probably once a month. I don't get the good meat. I just get like every once in a while my grocery store has shaved beef. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll make a cheesesteak. I make the rolls, and it's amazing. Like the number one thing that you can make any sandwich better with is homemade or scratch made bread. Like I make a decent burger. I don't make a great burger. I make a decent one, but I make my own brioche rolls and I toast them, and you put anything in between that. Again, like sandwich, like you just put anything between it and it's delicious. Like you can't help it. You toast it with a little bit of butter and it's good to go. As it turns out, I have a lot of opinions on a lot of things. So
this is great. And Bryan is commenting, Bryan Rinaldi commenting that I finally found my fellow sandwich lover. I'm like, yes, we could spend the whole episode on this. We probably shouldn't, but we could. Maybe another.
Always happy to. Yeah.
So okay, with that, let's get into it. And I usually like to start the more technical portion, kind of just setting a foundation, setting some context for folks. And especially when we're using a lot of really newer buzzwords like federated content and composable content management. I went on Hygraph's website today, and they call yourself a federated content management platform. So I think we should just start with, what is federated content?
Sure. So it's a completely loaded word, right? And in the CMS space, which I am now a veteran of via multiple organizations, we don't always like to refer to ourselves as a CMS. I do, because it is what it is. Like that's just how it is. Every company in the world needs a CMS to power whatever platforms they're on. But we don't like that term in like all the CMS companies. It's amazing. However, we also had this new term around federation, and federation is, like you said, it's a concept that's been around for a while. However, the term federation or the term composability or all the different buzzwords, and I'll do my best not to be too buzzwordy because I hate that. They're all like a buzz right now. Like it is the era of composability, of federation, of whatever this is, judging by the past year or so. But what is federation is the question, right? What is this kind of idea? And it's this idea that in this new modern ecosystem, I like to talk about the Jamstack, but it could be the mock architecture. It could just be modern web development, whatever we want to call it. We have broken things down into so many microservices, and not just microservices, but microservices as a solution, right? Mm-hmm. Micro software as a service solutions. We look at that and we have all these different places that our data lives now. It used to be we had a nice big monolith. We had our own database. The database had literally all of our data and we could query from the database. No big deal. Turns out that's not a great thing, at least not in the modern sense of the word. It's not a great thing. So we've broken it apart into these microservices. Use only what you need at any given time. And that's amazing. But what it does is it gives you a glut of APIs. It gives you a whole bunch of APIs that aren't consolidated, that you're querying from your front end, from your server level, from your host, wherever it is. You're having to make all these queries. They're all in different shapes. They're all in different URLs. And that's a lot to manage. It introduces a lot of potential bugs. It introduces a lot of extra mental overhead to our solutions. So what Federation as a whole is doing, and this is across multiple platforms, Hygraph included, but kind of all the different ways of doing Federation, is it's merging these APIs into a meaningful way that makes our developer experience and potentially our user experience at the end much, much stronger and much easier to visualize, think about, and use on a regular basis. So that's Federation. Content Federation is a flavor of Federation. And I'm not going to come out and say that any of these are the absolute right path for any situation. That's not what I do. However, they are great in their own kind of systems. So if we're talking about Federation, we could talk about it in a few different ways. First would be kind of the more traditional way in what we've seen, at least when talking to like enterprise customers and the like, which is a lot of people have custom middlewares. So things on their servers, little services that they own that have the sole purpose of combining these APIs together. And that works. And it seems pretty simple when you've got a couple APIs. It's no big deal to write a simple middleware, right? But when you start scaling the amount of APIs you have and you start bringing them in different ways and remodeling them and transforming them, it becomes a couple full-time jobs, even at a smaller organization, to manage that middleware. So that works, and it's definitely a way of doing it. You can have a custom middleware sitting on like AWS or something like that, but it's not great, and like that's not what a lot of people want to be working on. They want to work on the next feature. So there's also ways to handle it at the database layer. You can have scripts that are running and that are combining all of your various APIs into one database, or into, we call it, when we do it in like a content management system, we call it a content hub model. You bring all your data in and then use it from that one single point of reference. The upside is like you have all of it available in your CMS or in your single database. You have one API to query, and that's all great. The downside is freshness. You have to think about freshness and how to kind of always keep things in sync. When data changes in one layer, you're having to manage the data changes into your hub, into your content hub, your data hub there. So that's kind of the trade-off there. You can handle it in your front end. You can handle it in scripts on the front end and actually like from one database, grab the ID you need and then make another API call. I'd say I'm not going to argue for or against a lot of these. I'm going to argue against that one a decent bit. Like that one's not great user experience because that's a lot of API calls that you're making. And then two others that I really like. One's Content Federation, I'll talk about in a second, but one is like the idea of handling this on the platform or the host. This is a big thing that we're seeing coming up, I believe. Netlify just bought Gatsby, right? They bought Gatsby late last year, specifically around Gatsby's upcoming Valhalla release that is basically a federation play. It is a combination of APIs. And Netlify also had OpenGraph, I think. OpenGraph was a platform that they bought.
I think
OneGraph. It's Open API is one thing, and then all the names. They had OneGraph that's being sunset now in favor of Valhalla, but like that was that initial play there. So having it on your platform or on your host is great. Like it gives you that one API. It doesn't have some of the drawbacks of doing the like synchronization or anything like that. It doesn't have the drawbacks of the front end. The drawback that's there, and the reason that we had this idea of Content Federation, is that it keeps all the superpowers for the developers, right? So everyone who's touching the various APIs, they're still having to go through those various API points. There's no way for them to do mergers or remixes throughout. So really, it is a super powerful way of looking at doing developer experience. And that's great. And I really enjoy the process of working with OneGraph back in the day and some of these other things kind of coming up, or even like stuff like Apollo Federation. But one of the things that I'm really talking about recently and again, being in kind of the content management space for a while now, is that developer experience is great. And it's super important to move fast and to do a lot of amazing things. But editor experience is the other side to that. And if you're not creating superpowers for your editors, for the people who are managing the content on a regular basis, then either they're going to go around the cool stuff that we're doing and work in their own ways, or they're going to be so frustrated that your content gets stale or the various things you're working on get stale. So if we can figure out ways to remix our content and our data from multiple sources inside of our CMS to then allow for developers and content editors to both get superpowers out of that, I think that we all win. And that's to say that you can't even like use something like Content Federation, which is what that is, with some of these other patterns as well. You can kind of do both. However, I think that we shouldn't leave content editors behind in these kind of super powered conversations.
Okay, so I have so many questions coming out of that.
Perfect.
I think let's start where you ended on content editors, because one, I think that there's, we're still kind of learning what these terms mean and where these different products fit in and all of that. And one thing I've commonly seen with a lot of vendors in this space is that it's a read-only sort of thing. So they mesh everything together, and it's very much geared towards the developers, but the content editors still need to know, they have to go everywhere and need to know where everything is and how it all fits together and all of that. And so you said something that really resonates with me, because it's something we care very much about at Stackbit, not leaving the editors behind, but here's this thing that actually lifts both the experience for both developers and editors. So does that mean that Hygraph is also giving you this place to write back to the source of the content?
Unfortunately, not right now. It is fully on the roadmap for the product itself. Now, the idea of Content Federation and the thing that we're working towards and the philosophy that we're working with, absolutely. Mutations back into sources, 100% is where we want to go. Now, we're still super early days on the actual productization of the story. So right now we are in this kind of mesh situation. However, it is second or third priority in terms of the Content Federation features that we're working towards. It is highly important, because that's the superpower, right? Like, it's great to mesh all these things. And in fact, like, part of the meshing of them, I think, is the idea of that kind of remixing. Like, if you've got product information in Shopify or product information in BigCommerce, bring that in and allow for an editor to have a campaign page that showcases and pulls in multiple products, and then the developer can pull in the information on the product. But yeah, the idea that one content platform could be the stop for every piece of data that kind of comes into life is absolutely 100% where we're going with this. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Not yet, but yeah, it's the plan.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some overlap in the vision there. Yeah, that's great. And I'd be interested to see what happens with some of the other products that don't adopt that philosophy. And I'll come back to that in a little bit. The other thing that I wanted to address was, you said early on, which was, we're not a CMS. And that's another thing that has resonated with me at Stackbit. We're in this space that nobody really understands, because it's kind of new. I mean, it's not like, it's not to say like none of these patterns ever existed before. It's taking things that have been around for a long time and adopting them to the modern way of building websites, and just giving people the tools they want to work with. But so Hygraph became Hygraph not that long ago, right? You were previously Graph CMS. And so I'm guessing this is all kind of connected. You're not a CMS, we're a Content Federation platform. So I was curious to get your take on, what is it? Maybe it's like, why the rebrand, but also where are you seeing the confusion there? Because I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So first and foremost with the rebrand, take it with a grain of salt what I bring to the table on that. It was before my time at Hygraph. It was early last year. I've been with Hygraph since late last year, since October of last year. So grain of salt, but Graph CMS was the first GraphQL native CMS on the market. So leveraging a brand that was very strong into GraphQL and very strong into CMS was a natural play there. Developers were very excited about GraphQL at the time. And like I said, everyone needs a headless CMS, right? That's something that almost every business in the world at this point needs. So Graph CMS, it's a graph-based, GraphQL-based CMS. It's a great brand for that. It is a niche brand at that point, GraphQL being part of it and CMS being part of it. So Hygraph is definitely a play into going beyond that, both in terms of what a CMS is and should be, as well as not leaning as heavily on GraphQL as the key differentiator, because as we've seen over the past 5 years, most headless CMSs now have GraphQL as a way of querying. Not all of them, but most of them do. Mm-hmm. At the time, that was a relatively unique thing, that they were the first, GraphQL like centered CMS. So kind of splitting off a little bit from both of those is probably a good long-term idea. That being said, like when I talk about things, like the furthest I go from the term CMS is going to be content platform. However, call it what it is. Like, I think that every CMS on the market is trying to say we are CMS plus, whatever that plus is, whatever their key differentiator is. What they're doing with their terminology is trying to define what that plus is and not say the word CMS. Because I mean, let's face facts, CMS isn't cool, although I love content management systems. Like, I think they're very cool. But like the term is not innovative. It's not something that you're gonna sell a CTO on. You're not gonna sell an investor on. So I think that I would like to see a switch back in the industry. Like, hey, we're all CMSs, and that's cool. And we all do something very specific and very different in terms of differentiation. So it's a CMS plus. So let's just call it that, like CMS plus composability, CMS plus federation, CMS plus build, like a website builder. I don't know, like anything that you can kind of say around that, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I even noticed Contentful recently is they're a composable content platform now. So it's the space is evolving.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned GraphQL as kind of like a core feature originally, or core tenant. And I was going to ask you about that because it was really big for this period of time. And now that could be perception on what we're talking about, and the community is always following the next coolest thing. But in terms of the community, the content, the chatter that was happening, it felt like it peaked, and it's still there. It's definitely still relevant and used a lot. But does it remain kind of a core tenet of Hygraph? Are you going to move away from it? Are you sticking with it? What's the plan?
No, the overarching like philosophy of how GraphQL works and how GraphQL runs, I think only gets more powerful as we talk about these additional features, these additional federation things. So yeah, the Hygraph is still very much GraphQL based. And the funny thing to me is that like I've avoided GraphQL a lot in kind of my experience, because I was always doing smaller things and working previously at companies that had their own query languages and stuff like that. However, like the ideas of GraphQL and getting the right sized query and getting the right sized data for what you need only become more and more important the more data is flowing through a singular API. So making sure that your requests are specific, making sure that the documentation is well generated and well known, all these things that GraphQL does well only get more important as the surface area grows. And I kind of look at it, and if I'm looking at like the custom middleware perspective of federation, like I can't imagine being at a middle-sized enterprise company and being a new employee there and trying to figure out where everything bridges and how to form my queries without something like GraphQL. So if I were to do a custom middleware solution, which I wouldn't because that sounds awful to me, but if I were as a great middleware writer, which I'm not, I would probably turn to something like a GraphQL to do all that anyway. So I think that as we move forward into this bigger play around APIs and around federation, GraphQL, I think becomes just as or more important than it was before, or in other platforms, some sort of query language around that, because you can do it in a simple RESTful API. Like you can set, fields to include, fields to exclude, or what have you. The syntax and the developer experience around that needs to be really, really good. And GraphQL has that kind of built into it.
That is that concept of growing more powerful at scale is so interesting. And there's this parallel to conversation I just had last week that kind of opened my eyes of talking about React and along the same sort of way. Like React was amazing. It was the coolest thing ever. And now everybody loves to hate on React. And we're seeing all this emerging competition, and it remains really popular. But the thing that both of these tools have is they came from Facebook, and Facebook is solving some of the most complex challenges on the web. It's got to be one of the biggest web applications out there. And so I think that's a really interesting point, just that, it's powerful, even if it kind of falls out of favor of hobbyist developers, doesn't mean that it's not a great tool. And so I guess that also means that you're focused largely on solving problems at scale. Is that fair to say? Or
I mean, overall, I'd also look at it in terms of there are multiple types of scale too. Like there's scale in terms of application scale, which is obviously like GraphQL does very well at that. GraphQL like allows for all these kind of mutations, but there's also scale of minds and scale of employees. And as soon as you add more than a few employees onto a code base, you have to scale in some way, whether that is in your documentation, in your training, in your code base, whatever it is, you have to scale it in a meaningful way so that anybody coming onto that code base can manage it. And again, there's lots of ways to do that. GraphQL is one of those ways of helping all of that along. But then there's also the other scale benefits of like, performance and queries and all that good stuff to make sure that we're right sizing all of that.
yeah. So speaking of performance, that was one thing I was wondering is that and I have kind of two questions around this idea of being an extra. You're performing a service, but also introducing an extra layer of abstraction.
Yeah.
And so specifically with performance, what have you found there? I think like if you look at it on the server, like just look at it on paper, it looks like, hey, I'm hitting a service that is then hitting all these other services that I could just hit directly. Is it actually more performant or not?
I mean, it's going to depend on how you're using it, and it's going to depend on how you would have written it yourself. But there is a strong caching layer in front of it. So it's not that you're getting the freshest data. You're getting the freshest data that you specify, right? So there is a TTL on it. There is, you could set that to 1 and have not great performance. You could set it to 9,000 and have incredibly stale data. So there's give and take for that. But you can set that at kind of the individual level, and that's going to allow you to have some things allow for more staleness and faster performance, and some things that need to be up to date faster to go requery more often. But you're doing all of that behind the scenes. You're doing all of that without having to kind of refresh the data yourself. So there's a big win over the Content Hub model. The Content Hub model would bring all that data into the database, and then you never have to worry about the performance. It's just the one API that's being queried. However, like again, you're dealing with the freshness. You're dealing with the staleness of your data. Mm-hmm. So in this case, it is granular to the level of the field and the data that you're fetching, and then it's a cache that kind of sits in front of it that we hit for the most part before fetching renewed data.
Okay. So yeah, like one of the biggest services you provide is basically that caching logic.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And as we scale this, and again, like this is still fairly early days at Hygraph. Mm-hmm. We've got the first major set of features, released last year around it. It's a big concern. It is caching is one of like the 3 hardest problems in right. software engineering. But like it is the big concern, right? Because these features we know provide good developer experience. These features we know provide good editor experience. We have to make sure that it also provides good user experience. We have to make sure that the performance doesn't suffer because of them. So there's a lot to think about in that. And that's why like our first major set of features for last year, and we currently like we're still a month or two away from the next set of features around content federation. We're moving slow so that we can keep that top of mind. There's a big, yeah, it's a big concern. Like we want to make sure that that exact thing that you're talking about is always at the forefront.
Okay. Okay. So the last question in this segment that I have for you, still around that layer of abstraction, and I feel like you've already kind of touched on points of this, but it's a conversation that we have a bit at Stackbit, which is, I'll tell you what we talk about often is that we have this engine that handles reading and writing from the content source. It is the federation piece, more or less.
Yep.
And then, but it's particular, or like it's exclusively for the editing process. And so when folks are writing their front end code, generally they're just pulling from those individual sources. And now we're still early days in this new feature, this new mechanism. And I've got this theory of like, okay, well, we could take advantage of that mechanism already has all the content in it. So we can pull from that and use that to populate our site. And we have some like existential arguments and passionate conversations around that internally about, what does that mean for Stackbit, et cetera. But the question I was going to ask you, based on your customers, your users, the folks that you have talked about is, do developers, are they really craving having this one API to hit? Or, with most of the services that you're pulling in, they have mature SDKs that are already developed that they might be used to working with. Is there a preference over going directly to Hygraph? Is that a scale issue as well? What have you seen?
So overall, I don't think there's like this big fervor for that. I don't believe that like there's this like, I desperately want to get away from all of the amazing DX and all these amazing services, right? Like there's a lot of good on the market just in general. I just look at it as the more complexity that gets introduced, the bigger the surface area you have to worry about. And I think that the big thing for us going forward, especially like in talking with enterprise, is reducing the surface area of maintenance. And so whether that is the custom middlewares or the large scale number of APIs, I think there's a lot that goes into that. And like, it's not like, the weird thing is, and some of the features we're working on right now will actually make this a really strong reality, I think, is there are a lot of great content management systems on the market. You can pull that into Hygraph via content federation. Like I personally like the UI for Hygraph, and I like the API from Hygraph, so I don't have to worry about that. However, if my editors, for whatever reason, prefer WordPress, there's only so many of them out there, right? But like, there's a GraphQL and a REST API for WordPress. I can federate that in. Now, right now, it'd be a little cumbersome to do that because right now we don't have what we call top level federation, but that's the current feature that's being worked on right now. That's the next big release will be around top level federation. So I can bring in all my Shopify products without having to think about it. I can bring in all of my WordPress blog posts. I can bring in whatever the data I need. And then again, the power of doing content federation versus other federation techniques is that gets exposed not only to my API, but also to my content model, also to my editors, and can become more powerful the more sources I bring in and allow for remixability in my content. And then that allows for remixability on my front end as well.
Amazing. Okay. This has been great. I feel like these are the episodes where I'm like, we could go forever and ever. It could be sandwiches. It could be content management systems, but
sandwich content management. I don't know. Put
Sandwich,
content
not
management
sandwich.
between two slices of bread and it's delicious.
Good point. As long as it's homemade bread, right? Good bread.
Homemade bread, important.
That's right. That's right. Okay. So with that, our last segment here, I'm going to ask you a series of 9 short questions and answers.
Okay.
Pass if you need to pass. All right. Here we go. Number 1, tabs or spaces?
Spaces.
Okay. How many?
Heavy put upon sigh. I prefer in most of my work 4. That being said, I understand the value and sometimes use 2. And in everything I do for Hygraph, it's 2 because that's just our code standards. But I like 4. It gives me a good visual separation. I understand 2 gives me a more concise view and I can see more. So it's 6 to 1, half a dozen the other, but 2 or 4.
All right. You're very accepting of all of the configurations.
I do my best. Yeah.
Okay. Great. All right. Number 2. Where's the most interesting place you've traveled?
I'm not super well traveled. So I'm gonna say it's not super interesting, but I really enjoyed Florence in Italy. I went there just before my son was born, and we went multiple places in Italy, and Florence was amazing. Like I just enjoyed the vibe of Florence. I enjoyed some of the museums there. The food was great. Yeah, Florence.
Cool.
Firenze.
Okay. Number 3, what is your favorite open source product? Could also just be, like what's a tool you use a lot that you get a lot of value out of?
Well, Sean, I'm glad you asked. As it turns out, not only am I the head of DevRel for Hygraph, I also have a book coming out. And that book releases in the first week of May. I think so. Like it's coming on Eleventy. Eleventy is by far one of my favorite open source projects. I use it for as much as I can use it for. I've written multiple things on Eleventy, created a lot of videos around it. Zach Leatherman, literally, it feels like he reached into my brain and created a static site generator specifically for me. But yeah, I absolutely adore and will always love Eleventy. And Eleventy by example, coming to an Amazon near you soon.
That's amazing. Great. I set you up for that plug.
You did. It's like
yeah.
softball.
I love Eleventy too. I have a couple projects built with it, and I think Zach coined this term, "time to hello world," which I love it because it's probably the best example out there of it's a framework, so it does some of the intricate tooling things that you're going to need eventually in a project, beyond just writing a basic HTML page, but you can have like one line of code and run Eleventy and you have a website. It's kind of amazing.
My absolute favorite thing was at the time watching the first time Zach did Learn with Jason, where he was kind of like showing it off really for like one of the bigger audiences for the first time. And the way he did the hello world in it, the way he walked Jason through it, and the way it was on the website for a long time was this weird like command line interface.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, printing the hello world into, and I was like, no, write an HTML page and just initialize Eleventy and you have an Eleventy website. Like that's what I love about it because I'm all about HTML. I love HTML. And I could write an index.html and then insert little teeny bits of template language and have a powerful website that I wrote the way I wanted to write it. So it was very odd to me that, like, again, I felt like Zach had like pulled from my brain like a system that I was going to love using. Yet he used it in a completely different way for these like intro levels. And it just blew my mind when that was the case.
Totally. Okay. What have we got? Number 4. What has been the musical album or artist that's been on repeat recently for you?
Interesting. See, I feel like you should send me these ahead of time. That would have been good.
What's the fun of that? No,
I know. I think I've been doing a decent bit of writing and content work in the past couple months, and my go-to for what to play when that's going on is the Into the Spider-Verse soundtrack. It's an amazing soundtrack. It goes with an amazing movie, but like something about that hits me into a flow state really, really well. And I enjoy like some things I don't necessarily enjoy listening to, but help me work. This I enjoy listening to and helps me work. And it's one of the few things I can listen to that I can understand the words and still work to. And so I really enjoy that in a lot of ways.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Cause if I'm writing, I can't have the lyrics on. It's
Yep.
too distracting for sure.
For whatever reason, on Into the Spider-Verse soundtrack, I absolutely can. It's not always the case. I can't always do that, but with that soundtrack, I can.
Okay. I'm going to try that one. Number 5, what is the best or the most useful advice that you've received in your career?
Okay, I've had a long and weird career. So I'm gonna generalize a few different pieces of advice into one thing, and this goes for general career as well as if you want to be like a content creator or a DevRel or that sort of thing. And that is, and maybe I get sued by Nike. It's just do it, right? Like so. I didn't have a front end meetup group or a design meetup group in Memphis, and I wanted one. And I talked to the PHP like user group leader, and he said, "Just do it." And like I with another person in the community made a front end one called Memphis Web Workers, and that was my like community start. That's where I started building communities, and I wanted to start writing about technology and just to get better at writing. What's the like number one piece of advice? Just write. It's going to suck the first little bit that you do, but you build your taste and then you build your skill. And so I knew what was good content, and I wrote some bad content, and I got better and better. And same with YouTube videos. My first YouTube videos are absolutely garbage. They still get a lot of views because they were a good topic, but like now they're okay. My taste level always exceeds my skill level, but like it's just you have to do it. So like writing, you have to write to get better. Videos, you have to do video work to get better. If you want to be a great web developer, you have to. That was this old Shop Talk Show motto, which was just build websites. You had to just build websites if you want to be a web developer. And the same for like creating meetup groups or being a software engineer. Just do it. You'll be terrible to start with, or any work, right? Like you want the next promotion at your job, start taking on the responsibilities of that next role slowly, because otherwise you'll piss people off. But like, how else do you prove that you can do it? You do it.
You got to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Was it, it's Malcolm Gladwell who had said you need 10,000 hours to be an
10,000
expert at
hours.
something. It's like,
Yeah.
you just have to do the thing. You have to
Now
spend the
that's like pseudoscience, right? But like you can't argue with the fact that if you do something, it's not just doing it for 10,000 hours. It is I can't mindfully doing it, or there's some term around it where you like
okay.
you're focused on getting better through that 10,000 hours. But yeah, like you can't not improve doing something for 10,000 hours. Like you might not have mastery or whatever Malcolm Gladwell was really talking about, but you can't not get better if you do it that much. Like it's just a fact of the way humans work.
It's true. That would be hard to do. Yes. Okay. Number 6. What is the favorite part of your job today? What is your favorite part of your job today?
I love experimenting with code. Like, and that is one giant chunk of what got me into DevRel. Like I love building toys. I'm not a great finisher of like really highly polished software. Like I have a degree in philosophy. I don't have computer science. I am not formally trained. I am trained through multiple jobs working with multiple incredibly talented developers that I learned something from along the way. Every single developer I've worked with has taught me something. But I enjoy making little things that work and that teach things. So nothing makes me happier than showcasing a small toy and somebody saying, "Oh, that's cool. I'm going to use it to do this." And it's some like big, impressive, polished thing that I would never, ever be able to write. And they wrote it because of my stupid little toy over here. So that I adore that about DevRel. I like mentorship. And so like I'm building a DevRel team at Hygraph, and I'm really looking forward to the mentorship level there. But DevRel I got into because I want to mentor as many people as possible. I want to be that person that can help, and I get to do it. And that's an amazing thing.
That's great. That's great. Love to hear that. Okay. Number 7. What is your most enjoyable non-tech activity?
Ooh. So I am a traditional and consummate geek. So I've recently been able to get back into board games and tabletop RPGs. My wife basically said, if you keep spending only time with me and your 7-year-old son, you're doing something wrong. So she basically kicked me out of the house on Wednesdays, where there was a board game meetup that was happening at a local store. So I got back into that, and I love board games. Board games are amazing, especially modern board games. But I've also recently been able to pick DMing back up, GMing for tabletop role-playing games. And so I've got a group that's meeting every other week where I get to lead them through TTRPGs. And I love doing that. Like, it's an amazing thing. I mean, the right answer, right, is spending time with my family, and I love spending time with my family, but they literally had to kick me out because that was the only thing I was doing. So now I get to do these other things too.
So what's your favorite modern game?
So there's a few that I've picked up very recently that I hadn't ever played. My answer used to would have been, my grammar's gone. I would have said, up until recently, either Settlers of Catan or a game called King of Tokyo. And I still love those games. I think they're amazing games. But there are two games that I've discovered recently. One is a game called Photosynthesis, where you're literally planting and competing for sunlight for a forest. And then you grow your trees, and eventually when they're at the biggest level, you can score them and take them off the board. And it's got a lot of really interesting mechanisms that I find very compelling. It's amazing. My 7-year-old has beaten me at it. I mean, but it's simple enough that my 7-year-old can beat me at it, but it's complex enough that I truly enjoy it. And then the other one that I just started playing over like the winter holiday is Wingspan, which is a game about cultivating 3 biomes worth of birds. And it sounds odd.
These concepts are great. Yeah.
But it's a really, like, the mechanisms are really, really great. And they work together, not with Audubon, but with another one of the big, like, conservation and research areas in, like, whatever, ornithology. And like, all the birds have cards, and the cards have bird facts, and they're in their right biomes, and they eat their right things, and they have powers that are meant to be like, it is incredibly well done and incredibly fun. So like, the aesthetics of the game are spot on, and the mechanics of the game are spot on, and I really enjoy them both.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. All right. I was like, another topic we can go into. No, and moving on.
I like you were like 9 short questions. I'm like, I don't give short answers, Sean. It doesn't exist. It's really hard for me.
I'm egging you on anyways. It's okay. Yeah. Number 8. What's the biggest mistake you've made in your career so far? Now, I'll preface this because sometimes I get that as a response. Some people go with I took production down by doing this. And some people, it's a little more existential, like, oh, I wish I would have done this thing more back then. So there's 2 examples to work from.
It's so hard because I mess up so often. And I think that's important, right? Like, it's not a big deal because you learn a lesson from everyone. So I'm gonna give you a short overview of some really fun mess ups. So I'll give you 2 I took down prod type examples, and one mess up existentially that luckily didn't have long-term ramifications. That also now helps me. So issue number 1 was this was back in the FTP days. And we had a staging and production environment with FTP, but we didn't have a strong local environment that we could work in. So I would test things on stage and then copy and paste them up to prod. And I don't know exactly how it happened, but I know I misclicked in the FTP client, and I know the entire CSS directory moved. And this was for 15 large-scale newspapers across the US. Because I controlled the core CSS for all of them. They all worked from a common code base. There was no CSS for about 20 minutes on these 15 large-scale newspapers because I misclicked. I was very careful after that, and embraced when we got the version control later on. Similarly, but not code related, I worked at one of the lower newspapers before that, before I moved up to the corporate level, and I was in charge of email blasts. I will never send an email blast now without checking it 18 times, because it was the University of Memphis back when John Calipari was the coach. They were a big time in the NCAA. And I sent out an email blast with a subject line when a player had to be removed from the team of the wrong player.
Oh,
the
no.
email blast itself had the right player, because I didn't write that. I got it from the sports department. The subject line was wrong. And I clicked send and I broke out in a cold sweat immediately. And I have never sent an email without like at least quadruply checking things again. That goes for my personal emails as well. And then existentially, because again, no short answers here. At the newspapers I was working at the time, granted, this is like a decade ago, like all these things, because I'm amazing and perfect now. But at the newspaper I was working for, I was in the online department, and we had a fledgling video crew. We had a former like photography chief who was an online person, and he was spinning up the paper's like video stuff on the website. And I knew I wanted to be a videographer, and I knew I wanted to do all of this for the newspaper. And I was going to, like, it was like a sure thing. And then there were layoff kind of things that were about to happen, but they were mostly in sales. And the main salesperson for the video, like, strategy was going to be laid off, but she was already doing a little bit of the videography as well. And so they saved her by bringing her in and having her do all the videography stuff as well as some of the sales stuff. And that meant that I couldn't do it. And this was just as I was kind of getting my start in web development. I wouldn't be here talking to you if I had gotten that job. And chances are good I would be worse off financially and probably from a satisfaction perspective had I gotten it. I still do videography. I mean, I create YouTube videos and stuff like that. And I still use, it was like a 7-year gap, and all of a sudden I was opening up Adobe Premiere again. I was like, I remember how to do this. And so I've gotten, I got skills I continue to use, but it would have been completely different if I had done that.
Amazing. Okay. I love all of those. All right. Last one, number 9.
Yep.
This is a hypothetical question. You can host a lunch with anyone, alive or not, one person. Who would it be?
Oh man. I honestly have no clue. I'm drawing a blank on anyone I've ever admired. I admire no one apparently. I have no idea.
That's all right.
Yeah. I'll have to think about that. Like it's
okay. Maybe you think about it. We'll do another little teaser video, and we'll share that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Like
yeah. I promise it'll only be one if we do that. I won't tease anybody that time.
It's funny because I asked this in a show last year, and the guest threw it right back at me and said, well, who would you have lunch with? And I was like, I don't know. I asked the questions. I'm not supposed to have the answers.
That's my jam stack. Like I used to ask, like, what's your musical jam? And I had one person throw it back at me, and I was like completely unprepared. I was like, I like music. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. The questions aren't for me. Yeah.
I'm so glad that I had an answer to your music question this time, because like usually I would draw a blank on that as well.
Hey, I'm impressed with anybody who can show up and ask these questions, because like you said, didn't share them aside from the sandwich one ahead of time.
Yep. No problem.
So yeah. Anyways, appreciate it, Bryan. This was a really fun show. I feel like we could go on and on. Now we talked a lot about Hygraph. You were able to talk about your book for a minute, but if you want to talk a little bit more about either of those or anything else that you want to plug before we go, take another minute.
Yeah. So I would just say, if you're interested in the concept of content federation or CMS, not CMSs, I would hit up slack.hygraph.com. I'm in that. I manage the Slack community. So come talk with me about it, or talk with anybody in the community about it. It's a small, relatively quiet community, but come by, say hi. And then, if you are interested in static first architectures and static site generators, 11D by example comes out early May, and the pre-order page is live.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone in the audience and those of you viewing later. These shows are recorded live on the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the US, 5 p.m. GMT, and then later syndicated on YouTube. So from all of us at CFE.dev, thank you for joining us for this show, and we'll see you next time.